Yes, Professor Steinbock, you were saying that you do not claim that presentation is wrong, or there is anything wrong with presentation, but that there are other kind of phenomena that can be explained without recourse to presentation. I think you were elaborating on this topic.
Yes, and I just was making one final point about Marx was also, in his way, without any religious concepts or categories, pointing out the way in which reducing the object to itself also diminishes the object. So if it were merely functional or merely, well, also a matter of exchange value, but merely an object without seeing all the other intersubjective or interpersonal or interhuman relations to it, there's a kind of deficiency in the very presentation of what it is. So one could even just look at something like that and see the richness of the field of experience that is not accounted for simply in a model of presentation, even though, of course, we have a model of presentational givenness. For me, it's just been a matter that we've focused exclusively in phenomenology, almost exclusively, on that one mode of givenness, and given great details of understandings of those things in terms of the way in which our kinesthetic relations, the affective lure of the object, all of these things are extremely rich and dynamic, and we've paid so much attention to those that we think that it's the only mode of givenness, and then we start to interpret all experiences in light of that structure. And then we can't get to them, and then they remain on the limit of experience, or we say they don't exist, or we can't talk about them meaningfully. And I think we can, and certain figures have, without being a matter of speculation in the past. I mean, we in the 20th century, we've seen other phenomenological figures in particular not go into theology, as opposed to Jean-Nicolas, not go into theology, not go into speculation, but given phenomenological descriptions of experiences that are different from that one mode of experience.
Thank you. Well, yeah, if I can follow a little bit, it's the same issue. I have difficulties to deal with Scheller, because he claims also that values are given before the object is given as such. Something like that, and I find much more compelling the Husserlian approach to value that claims that values or value properties are always value properties of things, states of affairs, persons, and such.
But that's Shaler's point too, I think, actually.
Okay.
But
also.
But you know, on that point, on this issue of of Husserl. Husserl is also beginning to describe, I shouldn't say beginning because they're already in the 20s and earlier, but in the 30s. I say beginning because it's in volume 42 of the Husserliana. But Husserl was describing in very sketchy ways the necessity of giving an account of persons, and at least implicitly dealing with modalities of experience that have to be re-understood in light of the interpersonal structure. And this is why he availed himself, which I like right now a lot. I mean, in other words, I find it meaningful, the expression of the ought, or the absolute ought. And this was in concert with the notion of the call, mm-hmm. and calling. So a Ruf and a Berufung in Husserl. And this wasn't a matter of necessity, it wasn't a matter of duty, but he used the term Sollen, it's a absolute Sollen. And so this is already a sensitivity to a different language or to experiences that demand the formulation of new concepts to be true to those experiences. And that's basically the necessity I see of these vertical experiences, that's what they're doing.
Can I jump in for a second on this comment? I'm curious to know what you think about the role of awakening in this geography. So, the alt and the calling in relation to the Ishvahe, in relation to the I that awakes in front of the passive synthesis, this intentionality that he calls sometimes Gefühlsintentionalität. How would you envision this Ishvahe in relation to the soul? And
Okay, so I would say that there's a kind. Is that right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I would say there is, within the structure of the passive synthesis, broadly speaking, the kinesthesis that's operative there, and the structure of the affective allure and the perceiver, that this is still a structure that remains more or less one of my efforts. Now, not that I control it, not that I master it, not that I constitute it, but it's still within this reciprocal negotiating, if you wanted to use that term, structure. It's true that what's novel about it for us, reading earlier Husserl to later Husserl, what's novel about it is that it's not a subject-object structure. No. It's a co-emergent, I love that term, constitutive duet. It's a co-emergent, active, noesis, noematic structure. So that, and so he's struggling with the question, is sense constituted such that it's neutral and can acquire an affective allure or something like that? Is a unity of sense in it? Or does the unity of sense only arise in and through the affective allure that's exerted, as it were, on a perceiver who perceives and constitutes in this unity of sense? And he winds up opting for the latter at a certain point, at least in the passive synthesis text, where he's going back and forth. And whether he's 100% clear, that's a whole other question. But what makes sense to him for the most part in those analyses ultimately is that it's this structure that exercises an allure, and we're not going to get a unity of sense in a neutral way. Okay, now that's still a structure in which either if it's an eidetic object or it doesn't matter, so it doesn't have to be just perceptual, but that's still more or less one of managing, or there's all different terms we could use: provocation, negotiation, dialectical, I don't even know if it's really dialectical, but something like that. So the question is, in this other experience of the call, and interestingly, as you suggest, Husserl says in this text, I forget what object it was, like a chair or something like that, something calls out to me, and he uses the term calls out. So would that be the same thing as this other kind of call? And I would say no, it's not. Because in the provocation, either on the side of the object or the side of the subject, to pursue the object further, it's an epistemic quest, ultimately. That's one thing. Secondly, it avails itself to, if not necessity, if not causality, or if not even necessity, certain kinds of possibilities, like enticing possibilities, open possibilities, but also the structure of motivation. The structure of the ought, and especially, now there can be, so I distinguished three, I found three ways in which he used the term, although he didn't distinguish three clearly. There's a what he calls a practical ought, and that has an if-then structure. That might be a motivational structure. Like, if I do this, then I do that, or if I want this done, I need to do that. It can be superseded by another way in which I can do it better. It can be, so it can be overcome like that. Then there's something that he doesn't call, but this is maybe an inadequate name, but nevertheless what I would call a praxical ought. And in that case, there are certain spiritual arts that might be like reading Shakespeare level of spirit. Are you